What if one of the darkest chapters in human history did not begin with tanks crossing borders or armies marching to war? What if it began with economic hardship, political division, public frustration, and a growing belief that only one person could fix everything? Welcome to Mark's History Channel. Today we're exploring the story of Hitler's rise to power. This is one of the most important stories of the 20th century because it shows how a democracy can slowly collapse from within. When people think of Adolf Hitler, they often think of World War II and the terrible destruction that followed. But before any of that happened, Hitler was a little-known political activist trying to gain influence in a country struggling with crisis after crisis. His rise was not inevitable. It happened because millions of people were dealing with fear, uncertainty, political instability, and economic disaster. It happened because democratic institutions were weakened, extremist ideas gained popularity, and many leaders underestimated the threat he posed. This story is not about celebrating a dictator. It is about understanding the circumstances that allowed him to gain power and the lessons history still teaches us today. To understand how Hitler rose to power, we must first travel back to Germany after the First World War. In November 1918, World War I finally came to an end. After 4 years of devastating conflict, Germany and its allies were defeated. Millions of soldiers had been killed, entire regions had been destroyed, and the German population was exhausted from years of shortages and sacrifice. The defeat came as a shock to many Germans. Throughout much of the war, government propaganda had encouraged people to believe that victory was still possible. When surrender finally arrived, many struggled to understand how their nation had lost. Germany's Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated and fled into exile. In his place, a new democratic government known as the Weimar Republic was established. Although it represented a fresh start, the new government immediately faced enormous challenges. In 1919, Germany signed the Treaty of Versailles. The treaty required Germany to accept responsibility for the war, reduce its military, surrender territory, and pay massive reparations. Across the country, many citizens viewed the agreement as deeply humiliating. Economic problems soon followed. Political extremists from both the far left and far right began fighting in the streets. Assassinations, riots, and attempted uprisings became increasingly common. Germany remained a democracy, but it was a democracy under tremendous pressure. In this unstable environment, many people began searching for leaders who promised simple solutions to complex problems. One of those leaders would soon emerge from Munich. Adolf Hitler was born in Austria in 1889. As a young man, his ambitions had little to do with politics. Instead, he dreamed of becoming an artist. After the death of his parents, Hitler moved to Vienna, hoping to build a career in the arts. He applied to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, but was rejected. Over the following years, he struggled financially, living in cheap lodgings and often selling small paintings to survive. Vienna at the time was a large, multicultural city filled with competing political movements, nationalist ideas, and widespread anti-Semitism. During these years, Hitler became increasingly interested in politics and developed many of the beliefs that would later define his ideology. When World War I began in 1914, Hitler volunteered for service in the German army. He spent much of the war as a messenger on the Western Front and was decorated for bravery. Like many soldiers, he formed a strong emotional attachment to the military experience. Germany's defeat in 1918 left him bitter and angry. He rejected the idea that Germany had simply lost the war and instead embraced conspiracy theories claiming that politicians and internal enemies had betrayed the nation. After the war, Hitler remained connected to the military. In 1919, he was assigned to observe political groups in Munich. During one of these assignments, he attended a meeting of a tiny organization known as the German Workers' Party. Instead of merely observing the group, he joined it. That decision would change both his life and world history. The political group Hitler joined in 1919 was small, largely unknown, and attracted only a handful of supporters. However, it provided him with an opportunity to develop skills that would eventually make him one of the most influential political figures in Germany. Hitler quickly discovered that he possessed a talent for public speaking. He understood how to appeal to anger, frustration, and fear. His speeches often focused on Germany's defeat, the Treaty of Versailles, economic problems, and nationalist themes. In 1920, the German Workers' Party changed its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, commonly known as the Nazi Party. Although the party remained small, it attracted attention through aggressive propaganda and increasingly radical rhetoric. Hitler positioned himself as the movement's most visible leader and gradually gained greater control over its direction. The party also developed a paramilitary wing known as the SA, or Brown Shirts. These groups frequently disrupted meetings of political opponents and became involved in street violence. Political tensions throughout Germany continued to rise. Despite these efforts, most Germans did not initially take Hitler seriously. The Nazi Party remained a fringe movement with limited influence, yet Germany's economic and political troubles continued to deepen. Every new crisis created opportunities for extremist movements to gain support. For Hitler and the Nazi Party, the moment they had been waiting for was approaching. By 1923, Germany was facing one of the worst economic disasters in modern history. The young Weimar Republic was already struggling with war debts, political unrest, and the burden of reparations imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. When Germany fell behind on some of these payments, French and Belgian troops occupied the Ruhr, one of the country's most important industrial regions. The German government responded by encouraging workers to strike and resist the occupation. To support these workers, officials printed enormous amounts of money. At first, this seemed like a solution, but soon the value of the German currency began to collapse. What followed was hyperinflation on a massive scale. Prices rose so quickly that money became nearly worthless. A loaf of bread that cost a few marks in the morning might cost thousands by evening. Families who had spent years building savings saw their life savings disappear almost overnight. Photographs from the time show people carrying wheelbarrows filled with banknotes. Children sometimes played with stacks of money because the paper was worth less than the toys they could not afford. Pensioners, workers, and middle-class families were hit especially hard. The crisis created anger, fear, and uncertainty. Many Germans began losing faith in democratic institutions and traditional political leaders. Extremist movements on both the left and right used the chaos to gain support. For Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, the economic disaster appeared to be the perfect opportunity to challenge the government directly. In late 1923, Adolf Hitler believed Germany was on the verge of collapse. Inspired by Benito Mussolini's successful rise to power in Italy, he became convinced that he could seize control through a dramatic uprising. On the evening of November 8, 1923, Hitler and several hundred supporters entered a large beer hall in Munich, where Bavarian political leaders were meeting. Armed followers surrounded the building while Hitler announced that a national revolution had begun. The plan was ambitious but poorly organized. Hitler hoped that local authorities, military leaders, and nationalist groups would join his movement. Instead, confusion spread throughout the city. Many of the officials he expected to support him refused to cooperate. The following morning, Hitler and his supporters marched through Munich streets. As they approached the city center, they encountered police forces blocking their path. A confrontation quickly erupted. Gunfire broke out, leaving several people dead and many others injured. The attempted coup collapsed within hours. Hitler fled but was soon arrested and charged with treason. For most politicians, such a failure would have ended their careers. Yet the beer hall putsch unexpectedly gave Hitler something he had never possessed before: national attention. Newspapers across Germany reported on the trial, and millions of people heard his name for the first time. The failed revolution had not brought him power, but it had brought him publicity. After the failed beer hall putsch, Adolf Hitler stood trial for treason in early 1924. The court proceedings quickly became one of the most important moments of his political career. Rather than expressing regret, Hitler used the courtroom as a stage. He delivered long speeches defending his actions and presenting himself as a patriot who was trying to save Germany. Many newspaper reporters covered the trial extensively, helping him reach audiences far beyond Munich. The judges ultimately found him guilty and sentenced him to prison. However, the punishment was surprisingly lenient. Hitler was sent to Landsberg prison, where conditions were far more comfortable than most people would expect for someone convicted of treason. During his imprisonment, Hitler spent much of his time writing. With assistance from close associate Rudolf Hess, he began working on a book that would later become known as Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. The book outlined many of his political beliefs, including extreme nationalism, racism, anti-Semitism, and plans for Germany's future. Although the book sold modestly at first, it provided a blueprint for the ideology that would later guide the Nazi regime. Perhaps the most important lesson Hitler learned in prison was strategic rather than ideological. He concluded that violent revolution was unlikely to succeed. Instead of trying to overthrow the government by force, he would pursue power through elections and legal political processes. When Hitler was released after serving less than a year, he emerged determined to rebuild the Nazi Party and pursue a new path toward power. When Adolf Hitler was released from prison in December 1924, Germany looked very different from the country he had left behind. The economic crisis that had fueled much of the public anger was beginning to ease. The Weimar Republic appeared more stable. Foreign investment was helping the economy recover, and many Germans hoped the worst years were behind them. For Hitler, this presented a challenge. The Nazi Party had been weakened after the failed beer hall putsch, and several of its leaders had drifted away. If he wanted to achieve power, he would have to rebuild the movement almost from scratch. This time, however, Hitler changed his strategy. Instead of attempting another violent revolution, he focused on expanding the party through legal political means. Nazi organizers traveled across Germany, opening local branches and recruiting new members. They worked especially hard in rural communities and among citizens who felt ignored by traditional political parties. The Nazi Party also developed a more sophisticated organization. Membership grew steadily and propaganda became increasingly important. Hitler spent years traveling across the country, speaking at meetings and rallies. His speeches were carefully designed to appeal to people who felt frustrated, disappointed, or fearful about Germany's future. Despite these efforts, success came slowly. In the 1928 national election, the Nazi Party received less than 3% of the vote. To many observers, it still seemed like a minor political movement with little chance of ever governing Germany. Yet beneath the surface, the party was building a nationwide network that would soon be ready to take advantage of a much larger crisis. In October 1929, a financial crisis began in the United States that would quickly spread around the world. The stock market crashed, banks failed, businesses collapsed, and international trade slowed dramatically. The event became known as the Great Depression. Germany was especially vulnerable. During the 1920s, much of its economic recovery had depended on loans from American banks. When those loans were suddenly withdrawn, the German economy began to unravel. Factories reduced production or shut down completely. Businesses failed. Banks struggled to survive. Unemployment soared into the millions. Families that had finally regained stability after the chaos of hyperinflation suddenly found themselves facing hardship once again. Across Germany, long lines formed outside employment offices and soup kitchens. Many citizens lost faith in the political system. Governments rose and fell with increasing frequency as politicians struggled to agree on solutions. The Nazi Party saw an opportunity. Hitler argued that Germany's problems were the result of weak leadership and a broken political system. He promised economic recovery, national strength, and a return to stability. His message reached people who felt frightened about the future. For some voters, the Nazis appeared to offer decisive action while traditional parties seemed divided and ineffective. As conditions worsened, support for extremist movements grew rapidly. The Great Depression did not create Hitler, but it provided the conditions that allowed his movement to expand far beyond its earlier limits. By the early 1930s, the Nazi Party was becoming a major force in German politics. As support for the Nazi Party increased, propaganda became one of its most powerful tools. Hitler and his allies understood that modern politics was no longer won only through policy debates. Public image, emotion, and communication had become equally important. One of the key figures behind this effort was Joseph Goebbels, who helped organize the party's propaganda campaigns. Posters, newspapers, rallies, radio broadcasts, and carefully staged public events were used to spread Nazi messages throughout Germany. The party worked hard to present itself as disciplined, energetic, and capable of restoring order. Massive rallies were designed to create a sense of unity and momentum. Dramatic speeches and visual displays made supporters feel part of a larger movement. The Nazis tailored their message to different audiences. Workers heard promises of jobs. Business owners heard promises of stability. Nationalists heard promises of renewed strength. Many voters focused on the promises while overlooking the movement's anti-democratic goals and extremist ideology. At the same time, political violence continued. Members of the SA frequently intimidated opponents and contributed to a climate of fear. Democracy requires open debate and fair competition, but increasing violence made that more difficult. By 1932, the Nazi Party had become the largest political party in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament. Although it still lacked an outright majority, its influence had grown dramatically. The movement that had once met in small beer halls was now standing on the doorstep of national power. By late 1932, Germany's political system was struggling to function. The economic damage caused by the Great Depression had weakened public confidence in democratic institutions, and governments seemed unable to provide lasting stability. Elections were held repeatedly, yet no political party could secure a strong majority. Coalition governments collapsed one after another, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty throughout the country. Although the Nazi Party had become the largest party in the Reichstag, Adolf Hitler still lacked the votes necessary to govern alone. Some influential conservatives believed they could solve Germany's political crisis by bringing Hitler into government while keeping him under control. They viewed him as a useful political figure who could attract popular support while remaining dependent on traditional elites. This assumption would prove to be one of the most significant political miscalculations of the 20th century. On January 30, 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler Chancellor of Germany. Many Germans celebrated the announcement. Others worried about what might come next. Some believed the political system would moderate Hitler once he entered government. Instead, Hitler saw the appointment as an opportunity. He had spent years building support, refining his strategy, and waiting for the right moment. Now, after more than a decade in politics, he finally held one of the most powerful offices in Germany. But becoming chancellor was not the end of his rise to power, it was only the beginning. Less than a month after Hitler became chancellor, a dramatic event shook Germany. On the night of February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building, home of Germany's parliament, caught fire. Flames quickly spread through parts of the structure, and news of the blaze raced across the country. The Nazis immediately blamed communist conspirators and argued that Germany faced an urgent national threat. Whether the fire was part of a larger conspiracy remains debated by historians, but what is certain is that the Nazi government used the event to expand its power. The following day, President Hindenburg signed the Reichstag Fire decree at Hitler's request. This emergency measure suspended many constitutional protections. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, privacy rights, and protections against arbitrary arrest were severely restricted. Police gained broad powers to detain political opponents. Thousands of communists, socialists, and critics of the government were arrested. Opposition newspapers faced increasing restrictions. Fear spread rapidly throughout Germany. Many citizens accepted these measures because they believed they were temporary responses to a national emergency. But temporary emergency powers often have a way of becoming permanent. For Hitler, the fire provided an opportunity to weaken political opposition and move one step closer to complete control. In March 1933, Adolf Hitler achieved one of the most important victories of his political career. The German parliament passed the Enabling Act, a law that allowed the government to create legislation without approval from the Reichstag. Although the law appeared legal, its consequences were enormous. It effectively transferred power away from democratic institutions and into the hands of Hitler's government. Once the Enabling Act was in place, the Nazi regime moved quickly. Opposition political parties were banned or dissolved. Independent trade unions were shut down. Newspapers faced strict censorship. Regional governments lost their autonomy and came under central control. Political opponents were arrested, intimidated, or forced into exile. Citizens increasingly found themselves living in a society where criticism of the government carried serious risks. The first concentration camps were established during this period. These camps were initially used to imprison political opponents and perceived enemies of the regime. They represented an early warning sign of the far greater crimes that would follow in later years. In August 1934, President Hindenburg died. Hitler combined the offices of Chancellor and President, creating a new position that gave him unprecedented authority. Members of the military swore personal loyalty directly to him. The democratic system that had existed in Germany after World War I was gone. Hitler's rise to power was complete. The consequences would reshape world history and lead to one of humanity's darkest eras. The story of Hitler's rise to power is not simply the story of one man. It is the story of a society facing economic hardship, political division, public anger, and fear about the future. It is the story of how democratic institutions can weaken when citizens lose trust in them, and when extremist movements exploit crisis for political gain. Hitler did not seize complete power in a single moment. His rise happened gradually. Economic instability created frustration. Political polarization increased division. Propaganda shaped public opinion. Emergency powers expanded government authority. And step by step, democracy disappeared. History reminds us that freedom and democratic institutions should never be taken for granted. The events of Germany in the 1920s and 1930s demonstrate how quickly a nation can change when fear becomes more powerful than reason. Understanding this history is important not because it belongs to the past, but because its lessons remain relevant today. The rise of Adolf Hitler eventually led to dictatorship, war, immense suffering, and the deaths of millions of people across Europe and beyond. That is why remembering these events matters. History is not only about understanding what happened, it is about understanding why it happened, and ensuring that the same mistakes are never repeated. Thank you for watching Mark's History channel. If you enjoyed this documentary, please leave a like, subscribe, and join us for more fascinating stories from history. Until next time, thanks for watching.